Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Welcome back, everybody. Always learn so much about therapy and the arts when we have this gentleman and some of his colleagues with us. And I've learned in the past weeks that the arts heal, the music, the poetry. It's all therapeutic, much more than I think any of us realize. And it starts with a great organization in the greater New York area called Baltic Street Into Action. The man behind that is Peter Jampel, and he's back with us today. Hey, Peter, how you doing?
Steve, I'm really fine, and it's great to be with you, and I'm really excited about our guest today.
Same here. We're going worldwide, and I'm going to throw it back to you. Who do we have with us today?
So I have two esteemed colleagues who I think will talk in detail about two wonderful projects, one from Australia and the other from India. But I'd like to kind of give you an overview of the projects that Brydie, Leig Bartlett, and Barbara Hesser will be discussing, because to understand the context will help us appreciate the details of what it looks like in each of these localities. So first, the way in which we have structured these podcasts has brought to light how music promotes health and well-being for projects that center on mental health and physical health. We've also had projects that have highlighted the ways in which music and music therapy promote learning in the New York City public school system. We've also had projects that have dealt with the impact of war and trauma and the devastating impact that has had on people in the Ukraine and people in Israel. And although we haven't talked about it, it implies the need for peace-building strategies as well for the devastation that these traumatic, cataclysmic events have had on the people of those countries. One thing that I think we'll learn a lot more about is how music can promote sustainable community development. And one way in which we can understand this is to go back to the origins of how the United Nations, starting around 2003, promoted the development of a mapping project that would outline globally how music promotes all of these areas that we have outlined so far. And the UN helped to bring to life an organization called Music is a Global Resource, which has now produced 5 editions of a global compendium of music projects from over 100 countries, 100 projects in 54 countries. And to understand the purpose of that document is really to create an archive that could be understood and used to address similar problems in other countries where music can be employed to promote health, wellness, and in our current discussion, how to provide sustainable community projects. So we're going to now take a look at 2 of these projects. The first one, our guest professor, Brydie Leig Bartlett, who is a research fellow at the Creative Arts Research Institute and professor at the Queensland Conservatorium at Griffith University in Australia, will start with with our first project. Brydie, great to have you. I'm so excited that we've made this connection around the globe. You're 13 hours ahead of us, but hopefully we're all in the same time continuum today. So welcome. And just let me start with, tell us about this project, what it's about, what its intended purpose is.
Well, thanks so much for that warm introduction, Peter. And Steve, thanks for having us on your show. It's a great delight to be here with my wonderful colleagues, Barbara and Peter. So, Steve, you said something interesting in your opening words. You talked about the healing power of music. And the story I want to share with you about a project really speaks to the healing power of music at a community level, not just an individual level. And I want to take you, if you can imagine the map of Australia, right up the west coast to a really beautiful part of the country where the Australian desert, that red dirt, meets the ocean and meets the sea. It's a really spectacular, beautiful part of the country. And there's a little town there. The colonial name is Roebourne, but the First Nations name is Irramugadoo. It's a town with amazing culture and amazing strength and amazing beauty, but it's also a town that has had a history of trauma and loss. And that's the genesis of the project I want to tell you about today, called Songs for Freedom. 40 years ago, a young Aboriginal man died in the hands of police custody. His name was John Pat. And this started a long story of loss and trauma in this community. And after many, many years of division and pain, the elders came together and they said, we need a new story for this town. We need to find a way of healing, and we need to narrate a different kind of Irramugadoo and share that with the world. And so they approached an amazing arts and social justice organisation called Big Art, and they developed a songwriting program with the express purpose of healing this community, telling their story, telling the truths of how unjust the justice system was, and the sorts of changes they wanted to see. And what was so amazing was the songwriting space created an opportunity for people who were divided, who were in a lot of pain, to come together, to share their stories, to find connection, and then to share that with the rest of the country. And this program has been happening in the community. It's happened in the local prison, in schools, and it's also now extended to a national tour where they are trying to highlight some of the continued injustices in the youth justice system and some of the changes that need to happen. And they've been using their songs as a way of telling their story of how important it is to heal, but also of the reforms that we need to have in the justice system. And so it's a really powerful story about the way in which music and songwriting in particular can not only work on that individual level and that interpersonal level between community members, but at a community level. And now they're actually trying to heal the justice system. So it's a huge, big advocacy campaign they're running at the moment. I think it's a really powerful illustration of your opening words there, Steve, where you talked about the healing power of music. And Peter, how you talked about the ways in which music can promote community development, as the UN likes to champion around the world.
Brydie, we're going to come back to some of the further details, but I'd like to take this opportunity now to introduce Professor Barbara Hesser. By the way, I failed to acknowledge that Brydie and Barbara are both the co-editors of the 5th edition of Music as a Global Resource Compendium. Barbara is the founding director of the music therapy program at New York University. And Barbara, give us a picture of the project that you've chosen today for discussion.
It was hard to pick. There's so many wonderful projects in the compendium, over 100 projects, and that we had submitted from all over the world. It just was a wonderful experience in gathering all of these projects, and selecting one is hard. But I did select a project called Savaram, which is from India. It takes place in the southeast of the country of India, and it's located on the property of Sri Aurobindo's ashram there, and now an intentional community, a UNESCO recognized intentional community, a planned place of peace and diversity, and they have all kinds of very interesting approaches to community life. And a colleague of ours, Aurelio, who we have met several times and who is just a wonderful pioneer, in 2003 started a youth at risk project with the local Tamil Nadu communities, which are surrounding Aurobindo. And in those communities, there's a great deal of poverty and difficulty. There's so many young people who are not employed, and it's creating alcoholism, aggressive behavior, and gang formation. And so there's a lot of trouble around. And one of the Aurobindo community's projects is to go out into these communities and offer help for whatever is needed. And so this project, Savaram, was initially created to combat these problems that they were having, the gang violence and the unemployment, poverty. They selected 7 young men from the communities. I'm not exactly sure how they picked those 7 young men, but they picked 7. And they came to the Arts and Research Center on the property of Aurobindo, and Savaram became a place of offering vocational training and education to these young men. And that was in 2003. I like this project because it shows not only the sustainability of what you can do in a community, but because they still exist today, 20 years later, and they're still going very strong, they can show you what can happen over time if you stick to it and keep working with it. What their forte is they make instruments. There's a factory right there in their center where they make traditional Tamil instruments, and they make them by hand, and it looks like they started in the traditional way, making all kinds of traditional instruments. They have studied how to make this music themselves, because many of them were not musicians when they joined in, and they taught them music theory and how to use the instruments, how to tune them, how to use them. And they would take the instruments into the communities and create sound and music experiences for people in those communities. So you can see that these young men were expanding in many ways. They were learning how to make the instruments and play them and use them to help the communities. And they would also participate in festivals. And I learned that the Tamil language is one of the oldest spoken languages on the planet. And their culture, some of their instruments, one of the instruments that they've made recently is a stringed instrument that's 3,000 years old. And it was extinct, but they found passages in some of the literature that kind of told them what it looked like and how to make it and how to tune it. And so they've been making that so that they could bring that back into their communities to use it in the music making. I think that their immersion in the Tamil culture gave these young men some very important feelings of strength about their community and their history. which is immense. I mean, it's just so deep and old, and they got involved in that too. The creativity of Aurelio is fascinating. He's a music therapist trained in Austria, and he must have been living in the town that was doing these outreach projects and everything. And I think he got the idea to bring music into this work. And so I'm impressed with what he does, because now they're growing their own traditional woods in the nearby property, harvesting and using the traditional wood that is grown in that environment for their drums. They make flutes, they make chimes, but they are also bridging into the new, and they're making new instruments, sound healing instruments that are not old at all, but are new, and they've created a business. And it's a participatory business where they all own a share of it. And they have done a wonderful job in getting an international recognition to their place and to their instruments that they sell. And they have lots of videos online, and you can hear them playing, you can see them doing their work in the workshops, and they do seminars. They have researchers and craftspeople coming from all over the world to help and assist. And over the years, these young men have become older, more mature, and they are leaders now in their communities. And they're also leaders at the center, in that they're passing their knowledge down now to a whole new generation of young men and women, now women too, who are learning these crafts and learning how to carry on the tradition. So I think it's very interesting, because, it's been a great help economically to these people, because they have jobs, as well as they're learning so much about their culture and the music of their people. So you can see that over the years, they add dimensions to this project all the time. And I'm really pleased for them that they're doing so well. And we've kept in touch with Aurelio over the years. And he was in New York. We saw him there. And over in Peter had a meeting with him over in Europe once. And it's just that we've kept in touch. And he's very proud to be in the compendium, because he feels he's being honored by the UN and by the auspiciousness of the compendium. So I'm very happy about that too. It's given him a feeling of being honored internationally for his good work. And when I was preparing to talk about it, I became even more impressed with what one person can do when they're dedicated and devoted to a cause, and who love music, and the whole idea of music being something that brings these people together and has helped them develop their life. And so I think it's a big contribution to our compendium. It's exemplar in that it's different than many of the other projects are working directly with people for healing. And this, again, is more of a community effort, just like Brydie talked about with her project. It's about raising up the community that they live in. Yeah, it's really impressive.
What blows my mind, just by planting the musical seed, one little notion of, let's try doing music to help us feel better, bring us all together. And from there, we learn how to play music. That's the part that kind of blows me away. Then that turns into making the instruments, growing the wood for the instruments, providing jobs for people in the community. My gosh.
I know. It's so creative on their part to do this. Yeah. And they started with 7 young men, and they're now a team of 85 people who are employed and doing this work. And it's grown exponentially. So that's really great. When you say, 7, what are you going to do with 7 people? but now it's 85 and growing. So I'd like to go there one day. I think it would be fun to be in the community with them.
Both of these projects are very compelling and have a lot of similarities in terms of preservation of cultural heritage, musical heritage, the heritage of instrument making. Brydie, can you tell us what attracted you to this project? What really brought you in terms of the aspects of this project that you feel are most compelling?
Peter, that's a great question. I think there are many appealing things about this particular project. As I said, it's not only working on that really individual sort of communal kind of level, but in this case, the Songs for Freedom project are really trying to tackle some of the big systemic issues in society. And I guess this is also what the compendium is really interested in. How can music help us address some of the most pressing issues of our time? And in the Australian context, and I know it's similar in the US, there are major issues with the justice system. It's very discriminatory. In the Australian context, there are really astronomically high levels of incarceration for our First Nations people. And so this project was not only about healing a local community, but thinking about how we can heal those systems. Because it's not that more young First Nations people are committing crimes, it's more are actually being locked up. And so there's an inherent racism there as well. And so this project is really trying to use the power of music to speak to power, to get attorney generals on board and listening to the testimony that comes out of these songs that have been written that are seeking to heal not only individuals and a community, but a system. And so I find that really, really compelling. There are a few things in this world that can operate on that really micro level when you make music together, and also operate on that macro level. We think about huge, big social movements where music has been a really key part of them, the civil rights as an example. And so I think that's so powerful when you can see it operating at all those levels, from the micro to the macro, often at the same time. And so that's why I find this project so compelling. Like Barbara's story as well from India, where these things are generative and they grow over time in the kind of impact that they can have. Like you said, Steve, a small seed can be so generative for big social change. And so that's what I find so compelling. We're actually looking at the Songs for Freedom as a case study in a major project I'm doing at the moment called the Creative Change Project, which is looking at how music can promote social equity, particularly in areas where there's been disadvantage over many years.
So the idea that these projects not only grow, evolve, take new directions that were perhaps not anticipated when they first began, but have followed a kind of course of logical development based on the needs of the people who are being provided services is extremely important. And now, Brydie, as you talk about how, in a way, one project's being piggybacked on the experience of the other. So it provides, as a researcher, a field level opportunity to learn what worked, what didn't work so well, how to tweak it, how to adapt it to a new setting. This really is what the UN had in mind in terms of how projects could inform each other's development. And it really sounds like that's happening.
Absolutely, Peter. And I think also what's so compelling is we've just shared 2 stories in a short space of time. So the compendium has 109 projects that are equally amazing, as Barbara said. And so imagine the power of these stories and how rich they are, magnified by over 100. And then if you think of that 109 just being a small little sort of tip of the iceberg of what's happening around the world, and multiply that by the thousands and thousands of programs that are happening, it really does show what a rich resource music is in communities everywhere. And of course, we know that music is one of the most ancient things we do as human beings. And so I think we're really seeing the power and the need for that now, particularly with all of the division and complexity we see in society at the moment.
Peter, I'd like to add a couple of things. I just want to tell the listeners that if they would like to see the compendium, it's published free online. And musicasaglobalresource.org. So just put in music as a global resource and it will come up. And you can copy that, you can share it with friends, you can read it right there online on our website. So it's actually there for everybody as a resource to be used. I think the compendium is organized by category of what actually it achieves. So, I think that's partly what people want to know is what does that do for people? How does it work? And one of the questions that everybody in their project answered was, how does music help you achieve your goals? What is it about music? And they do answer that. So I think that the compendium is a rich resource for people, or I hope it is, because it's, and the only other thing I want to say is the reason that the UN asked for the compendium, because I was there at the time, was that they wanted to show other government ambassadors and other countries what is possible with music, because it's seen as a cost-effective treatment for people. And we don't know of a culture that doesn't like music and doesn't have music and isn't tuned into that aspect of human life. So that's the reason for the compendium, to show people that it is possible and that people are doing it everywhere. Wow. And to get to get resources. So there's contact information for all of the projects. There's websites to go to learn more. So it's more comprehensive than just describing the project. It's an effort to link projects.
I never even considered the cost effectiveness of music. And when you really think about it, and this is my belief, we all have something to heal from. We all do.
We do.
Whether it's from our childhood, something that was in our subconscious, and we're dealing with it, as adults now. And what do? Instinctively, not even knowing it, put on music.
Yeah.
And what does it do? It makes you feel a certain way, So on a small level, that works for us anyway. But then you take these situations with, racial divide and bringing communities together. It's absolutely amazing. I could go on. I would love to go through all 109 stories, but we're out of time today.
Yeah. And that would be a real test of our memory to get every single one.
I can't even remember lyrics of songs, so that I wouldn't even try doing that.
Yeah.
I want to tell everybody the website to learn more about Baltic Street into Action is just that, Baltic Street into Action. It's a .com or a .org, Peter?
It's a .org.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, it's .com.
Got it. I wasn't sure. And with that, all the details of a great organization, and certainly looking for support as well to keep a lot of what we're talking about here going. Anything else to add, Peter, today?
Just a big thank you to both of you for being on today and for sharing your stories. I really appreciate it.
For having us. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you both. Thanks to everyone here. And a great inspiration. Just proves once again that music heals. And thank you again. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Woo! Let's get crazy!
In movies, when someone at a party jumps into a pool fully dressed, everyone cheers them on and jumps in too. Just so you know, in real life parties, nobody jumps in after you. You just look stupid.
Come on, jump in! Come on!
Most party fouls are pretty dumb, but if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Learn more at ultimatepartyfoul.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.